Welcome to the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast. We are brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. Find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. With Charlie Roumeliotis, I am Pat Boyle. Prospects camp is going on for most of the NHL, including the Chicago Blackhawks. The start of free agency kicked off at 11 a.m. local time on July 1st. That's when we are taping this podcast. How you doing today, Charlie?
I'm feeling a little testy today, Pat. I'll get to that in a little bit. But we were just talking off the air. We're recording this just before 4 o'clock. Was this the worst free agent frenzy potentially of my lifetime? This was a snooze fest all day.
It was, and I think a lot of first of all, it wasn't a big free agent class. It was Mitch Marner and then pretty much everything else, and Bennett and the three Florida Panthers that all got re-signed. I think because of the cap going up, teams were able to hold on to the players that they wanted to hold on to or get creative. And so leading into the UFA market opening up in free agency on July 1st, a lot of the big ticket or intriguing pieces were already locked up by their own teams, or in Mitch Marner's case, Toronto wanted something in return, didn't want to let him just walk away for nothing, so they did a sign and trade with Vegas.
Right. And I have a theory too, like specifically Edmonton. I was watching Edmonton throughout the day clear money out, but to this point, since this recording, they have not signed a single player all day long. And I'm wondering if teams that are Stanley Cup contenders see how thin this free agent class is and are saying, you know what, we're just going to go into the season with our current roster, and let's use that cap space at the trade deadline where we can go maybe acquire, where the pool is a little bit bigger, where you're going to have some sellers that are near the bottom of the league. Also, I could see there being more sellers this year than usual, so they can kind of play themselves into the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes. But I'm wondering if that's an avenue where these contenders are like, hey, rather than going out and overspending on these middle to low tier players in free agency, let's just hold on to that cap space and we'll identify those needs at the trade deadline.
Yeah, I like that idea. You know, the other thing we talked about was, Frank Seravalli said this was going to be the summer of the offer sheet. And I've been watching TSN all day. While there are some rumors about some offer sheets possibly being floated around out there, again, just like you said, teams not wanting to take themselves out of the Gavin McKenna sweepstakes, it's only if you make north of a $4.6 million offer that you have to give up your number one. So, if you're going into the season thinking you're possibly in one of the bottom half of the league, you're probably out of the offer sheet game. Right. And it's the top 16 teams who think they're in that, and you'd have to be on solid footing before you would risk that. So going to be interesting to see how it plays out. The Blackhawks did make a trade on July 1st. They acquired for the third time, 30-year-old Sam Lafferty from Buffalo for a 6th-round pick. Just 7 points in 60 games with the Sabres last year. He's got 1 year left on his deal, a $2 million cap hit. But we know this guy brings speed, versatility to your bottom six, can play several different spots in your bottom six, and he's a known quantity, and he's on a short-term deal.
Yeah, so a year ago, around the draft, when the Blackhawks had acquired 𝗬𝗍𝗶𝗹 from the Vancouver Canucks, they also acquired Sam Lafferty's negotiating rights. And at the time, you figured, okay, the Hawks are going to iron out a deal with Lafferty, but they couldn't agree on terms. And so Lafferty ends up signing a 2-year contract in Buffalo. So I think the Hawks have always had their eye on Sam Lafferty because they appreciated what he brought to the table when he was with Chicago in the 2 years. By the way, fun fact, so Lafferty was part of the package that Chicago sent to Toronto on February 27, 2023 with 𝗵𝗍𝗶𝗹 that fetched a first-round pick to Chicago that the Blackhawks ended up using on Vaclav Nestrasil with the number 25 overall pick. So it's kind of like a full circle moment here. Lafferty coming back to Chicago. I've always appreciated what Lafferty brought to the table with the Blackhawks, but at this stage in the game, this is nothing more than a depth type acquisition for Chicago. Fits their mold or their identity that they want to play with, speed. And no surprise that the Blackhawks ended up going out and acquiring pieces like they did with Ondrej Burakovsky and Sam Lafferty, where there's more team control versus going out on the free agent market and signing potential bottom tier players to 2-3 year contracts longer than you're willing to go and just getting the same kind of impact. So I'm not surprised that the Blackhawks chose to go down this route.
All right. What do you want to do first? Talk about prospects that we talked to the last 2 days or the Kyle Davidson meeting the media? What do you want to do first?
So actually, first off, we have a quick little minor signing that the Blackhawks just made in real time. The Blackhawks agreed to terms with forward Dominic Toninato. I've never even heard this guy. Two-way contract for the Blackhawks at an $850,000 cap hit. And I'm looking at his stats with the Winnipeg Jets this season. Only played in 5 NHL games and 15 NHL games the year prior. So this seems like a kind of a guy that will go up and down from Rockford and potentially be like a 14th forward. So just kind of park that as we continue forward. Let's get to, okay, what I was saying earlier, how I was feeling a little testy today is I was a little bit surprised by the reaction by a portion of the fan base that how disappointed they are with the lack of inactivity for Chicago today. And I'm a little confused by it because I'm not exactly sure what fans were expecting going into this day. Now, I want to preface this by saying I realize the internet can sometimes not be a strong indication of some of the well-versed fans that understand how thin this free agent market was, and recognizing that this probably was not a draft or a free agent class that you wanted to be throwing around money. And so I was just a little confused by, by a portion of the fan base feeling like the Blackhawks swung and missed by not adding some players. I think you see some of the contracts that got thrown out there today, and there were a lot of eye poppers. But also, I think some other fans also need to realize that free agent works as a two-way street. So it's easy to say the Hawks should have been in on Mitch Marner. The Hawks should have been in on Nikolai Eers. The Hawks should have been in on all these players. Nikolai Eers, by the way, has not signed yet. Sounds like he's still weighing his options, wants to go to a contender. But you also need the player to want to come here. So the Hawks can pick up the phone and say, hey, we'd love to have you in Chicago. But they're getting offers from these Stanley Cup contenders. And so that's the priority. Similar situation with the head coaching position. Like when Mike Sullivan became available, obviously Chicago's going to pick up the phone and say, hey, Mike, what's your interest level? But he immediately goes and signs with the New York Rangers. So I was just a little confused by some of the reaction because I'm not sure practically what fans were expecting from Chicago to do this summer.
Yeah, I don't know if they have a firm grasp of where the team is at, where the free agent market was at. To me, there's only a few players that I would have said, like, boy, that would be a piece I would be willing to kind of upset the blueprint or the cap structure that we had set up and had trending and had allotted this for this player and allotted this for that player. There's only a few players. Sam Bennett would have been one of them, wasn't on the market. I would have pursued Mitch Marner, but again, it takes two to tango. And Mitch Marner, while he did want to go to a Western Conference team like we predicted, he wanted to go to a contender. and so he ends up in Vegas.
And Pat, I saw a report earlier in the day that Mitch Marner had stopped negotiating with the Toronto Maple Leafs in the middle of the season because he had started to get wind that Vegas was interested in him. And so it was almost like Marner was already plotting his path to Vegas even during the season started. So Chicago, like you mentioned, was never really an option for him.
Yeah, I mean, name a player that was signed today that you feel the Hawks missed out on. I don't. I mean, yeah, there are some players that would be an upgrade of what you have now, but to me, they don't signal championship core piece or necessarily going to be better than a younger player that you have already drafted that has shown some promising signs in the OHL, in college, the AHL, or already in the National Hockey League. So, but I get it. I heard Duncan Keith on the radio today, and he was being asked about the rebuild, and rebuilds stink. At the end of the day, when you're talking about it at the beginning, you're trying to be optimistic. You're around a team, right? What did every team say? Well, we know it's going to be tough, but we're coming here. We're showing up to win. We hope to expedite, things like that. And you kind of get in that mode where you're like, well, you never know but at the end of the day, take a look at teams in the National Hockey League. Take a look at Edmonton, how long it takes for them. Take a look at Florida even. They were a doormat for, it doesn't happen overnight. I didn't expect much in free agency at all. I still don't expect much. And there wasn't really a ton out there that I thought the Hawks would be interested in, to be honest.
Yeah. It's almost like you really can't appease both sides, because how often did we hear this past season where it's like, play the young guys, play the young guys, play the young guys, because, there were some veterans in the lineup that were kind of taking some roster spots. And now the Blackhawks are essentially saying, we're handing the keys to the young guys going into this season. We want to make sure that their path is not blocked this coming season to solidify important roles for the Blackhawks moving forward, where Frank Nazar is going to have an opportunity to play a full season in a top 6 role, just like Connor Bedard, just like Landon Slaggert will get the opportunity to solidify a potential third line role, bottom 6 role, whatever. On the back end, with Sam Rinzel and Artem Levshunov, I expect them to be full-time NHL players next year, and to kind of say, hey, these are going to be the 2 players that are anchoring our right side and be foundational pieces for us. It's time to let them go play 20 plus minutes a night. And so that's what Chicago is thinking. On the flip side, this is where I can see the only argument of why fans could be upset that they didn't add a stronger supporting cast. And it's Connor Bedard getting a winger for him. And here's the thing, with Bedard, I understand the need or the importance to want to make sure that he's playing with a strong supporting cast, so he's not just out there getting demoralized when he's making these unbelievable plays, but he doesn't have finishers on his line. But you don't want to do that irresponsibly, where you're like, all right, let's just go overpay for this guy just because we want Connor to play someone, and now you're impacting the long-term financial picture. What I will say to that point, I think 𝗏𝗏 𝗟𝗏 is a player that Connor Bedard needs to play with 75% at least all season next year. That can't be a guy that is going long stretches without playing with Connor. I think Bedard and 𝗏𝗏 need to be a package duo pretty much all season, and you rotate that third player, because that's the guy that Connor plays well with and thinks the game on the same level as. And so that's where I will that's kind of my solution to that problem. 𝗏𝗏 and Bedard, if I'm Jeff Blashill kind of penciling the opening night roster moving forward, we know what happened last year where Bedard and 𝗏𝗏 were on a line together all training camp, and 𝗵𝗏 was the third, and then opening night roster hits and they completely changed it. So I think going into this year, Bedard and 𝗏𝗏 need to play almost all season together, and you just rotate the third player, so that way you know that Bedard is growing with an NHL caliber player that can also play well off of Bedard's skill set.
All right, let's talk about some of the prospects that we got a chance to talk to on Monday and Tuesday at Fifth Third Arena. Again, they're doing prospects camp. It is off ice. They go through a lot of different seminars, talking about nutrition, talking about breathing, all sorts of team building exercises, and honestly, pro building, helping these 17, 18, 19-year-olds at the beginning of their career to, set them out on a path that will make them successful hockey players and successful young men. Let's start with a guy who said he'll play wherever Connor Bedard is not playing, and that's Anton Frondell. We caught up with him yesterday, Charlie. When you see him in uniform on the ice, 200 pounds, whatever. But when you see him with his pads off, scouts told me thick. I thought he had a well-developed body for, an 18-year-old.
Yeah, he's already 200 plus pounds at 18 years old. And so I think when you see that size, you're like, okay, he's pretty much close to what his playing weight is going to be long term. Like he might want to add.
I think he'll be 220. But like his frame is
sure
where other players, when you looked at Reichel and some other, like you're like, okay, his frame is 3 years ago was like really lean, right? But he comes in with a more mature body.
Right. Yeah, so he's currently listed at 205. So I can see him getting up to the 215, 220 range, where 220 might be the high end of it because you don't want him to, sacrifice the skating ability. But yes, he's the kind of player that and Kyle had said this, that his game translates into May, June, and July, like into May and June. Like he plays a playoff type style. And I think Chicago appreciates that. And I'm excited. I'm excited that he's going to go back likely to the Swedish Hockey League to just play another year there versus the temptation of let's just get this guy in right away and let him move in. Because it would be too big of a jump for him to go to the NHL right away. I appreciate that he has already voiced his opinion of potentially wanting to push for a roster spot out of training camp because it's very ambitious. But I think the responsible choice would be for him to go back to the Swedish Hockey League, continue developing there, kind of build off of his season last year, but being there full time, and then he makes the jump to professionals the year after that.
His confidence is oozing. I know, obviously English is not his first language, but when he talks about the comparisons to Barkov or the shot to દ્રঢ়, like he kind of has a snide little wry grin after he says it. He's like, yes, good player, right? Basically saying like, yeah, I think I'm a good player and I'm going to be a good player. And it not a cocky approach by any means. It was just confident and very impressive to see again from an 18-year-old young man.
Yeah, he's got a quiet confidence about him that spills out into his game. And I think I even saw a quote that from the other day saying, he's like, I keep mentioning Barkov and I don't know if that's a bad thing, but that's the kind of guy I see myself at. So it's like, he's almost like making sure that he's like showing respect to a guy like Alexander Barkov, but he's also showing the confidence that I'm not afraid to throw out that comparable because that is what I'm striving to be.
All right, we didn't get to see Vaclav Nestrasil on draft night because he was in Czechia with his family watching it on the couch, and he said they probably woke up the town because of the time it was in the middle of the night. You had a brief encounter with Nestrasil. What was that like?
Yeah, so I was kind of sizing him up just to see his body type, first of all. And I was like, there's still a lot of growth that he could have. His legs are a little bit tiny, not tiny like in a bad, but his legs are long, especially at 6'6". So I'm like, man, this guy could add more muscle to his frame and become an impact type player in the years to come. The one question I always ask NHL or prospects this question, when they get drafted is which NHL comparable do they see themselves as, or who they like to model their game? Because it just offers a little bit of a glimpse of into their identity. And when I asked him this, he says, I don't really have anybody really. And he didn't say that as far as like, I don't really know who I would be. He was almost saying that like, I kind of want to carve out my own path. But then he brought up Matthew Knies as a guy that he like hopes to take parts of his game. And I was like, that would be nice if he could kind of be up that alley, especially given his size. He's 3 inches taller than a guy like Matthew Knies. So I appreciated Nestrasil, humble guy, well-spoken. And it was nice it was just nice to kind of just see, boy, Pat, all those prospects were lined up. And I was like, these are some big boys right here for some 18-year-olds. They look
like the Bulls.
They did.
No, it's funny. Mason West was right next to Nestrasil, and again, he's another 6'6" prospect. And you kind of think of like the whirlwind these kids are on, right? Like, you know, you're in LA on Friday, Nestrasil's in Czechia, and it's Monday morning, and you're already in Chicago, and you're answering these questions. But Mason West, very impressive young man. We got to see that on Friday when he conducted the interviews in Los Angeles. It continued on Monday. Loyalty is something that jumps off the page when he talks about his commitment to his Edina high school football team, being a captain, unfinished business. And then we carried it one step further. You know, this is a question that you know, Mason West is going to get until he's no longer a dual sport player and an athlete. And that is, if things go really well for you in the football season and more Division I suitors come your way, and NIL, which we all know plays a role in this as well, if they come knocking with some offer, will you pivot and leave the hockey track that you're on, expecting him to go to Michigan State the following fall? And he said, no, I'm committed to hockey, and I've already went through this process. It was not easy. It was painstaking. Spent a lot of time on it, and very confident and committed to my decision. So here we are watching him committed to his high school team, committed to the collegiate team that he says he's going to play hockey for, committed to the NHL team that drafted him. So we'll see how it plays out, but very interesting young man, very intriguing. And again, he's only 17.
Right. I honestly don't mind that he's going to be playing football his senior year, because his motivation behind it is, I won a state title for my high school in hockey. Now I want to go do the same for the guys that are leaning on me as a senior quarterback to help guide them to a state championship. Like, if he accomplished that goal as a junior, he would probably just go directly into hockey, because he's like, okay, I checked both the boxes. But it's almost like you're seeing him be unselfish by going down the football route for his senior year, because he wants to be there for his teammates. I was doing a deeper dive on Mason West the day after they got drafted, after I kind of had a chance to decompress. And I realized that he goes to the same high school that Anders Lee, who is the New York Islanders captain. And Anders Lee was not only a dual sport athlete, he was a multi-sport athlete, football, hockey, and baseball. And in 2008, he was named Minnesota's Gatorade Player of the Year for football. The next year, he was named a finalist for their Mr. Hockey Award, ended up pursuing hockey. And I think Anders Lee was a 6th round pick, so it's not an apples to apples comparison, because Mason West is a 1st round pick, so Chicago is investing a lot in him to become a hockey player. But it didn't seem to deter Anders Lee from going down the hockey route, even though he was a Gatorade Player of the Year in football. So I don't really have concern when it comes to that. The only concern that is different from Anders Lee's path is, like you mentioned, the NIL money now that's available in college. That could be very appealing to a 17 or 18-year-old, especially that just wasn't an option back then. So Mason West has been on record multiple times saying that hockey is his path. So until he says otherwise, I don't think there should be a reason to be concerned if you're a Chicago fan.
Jack Pridham was the 92nd overall pick by the Blackhawks last year in the draft. He made some news on Tuesday saying he is not going to be going to Boston University. You had a chance to speak with him in the media room. What did Jack Pridham have to say?
Yeah, word circulated on Tuesday morning as we were kind of going into Blackhawks development camp. And ironically, the 2024 draft picks were scheduled to talk today. And so Jack was was the first guy actually we talked to. And he confirmed that his decision after really mulling it over with the family that he is decommitted from Boston University. And if he doesn't make the Blackhawks out of training camp, then he's going to go back to the OHL's Kitchener Rangers, which is going to be the expectation. And I think a reason for this, so when he started out earlier in the year, he didn't play the OHL. He went to the OHL in November after the NCAA rules change, where it's like, okay, he can go play juniors, and now because of basically the NCAA said you're a professional player if you go play junior hockey. So that's why he wasn't playing in that league. So when he goes over to the Kitchener Rangers, he was a top player on that team. I thought maybe he would continue going down the college path, but I think he enjoyed his time so much with the Kitchener Rangers, and it better prepares you for the rigors of an 82-game season in the NHL, because it's just all hockey all the time. And this now allows Jack Pridham to sign an entry-level contract with the Blackhawks and go back to juniors. Whereas if he was with Boston University, he would not be able to sign his entry-level contract until his collegiate season ends. So I think that could potentially come down the pipeline in the coming weeks, or at some point this season, where the Hawks sign him to an entry-level contract and just get him in or get him under contract while he continues playing in junior.
All right. And, Kyle Davidson talked about these prospects kind of owning their development path. So he, while they'll be there to bounce some ideas off of and consult, they don't want to be making the exact decision for said prospects. So again, he wants to see all of his prospects take ownership of the development path that they choose in hockey. Let's get into the rest of the conversation with Kyle Davidson on basically why things were quiet. And basically, he was asked towards the end of the conversation, where is the rebuild at as we approach training camp? And he said, we're at a different spot where they are beginning to leave openings on the NHL roster for young players and young prospects in their system to get opportunities to take those positions.
Right. The last couple years for Chicago, the goal was to try to get veteran type players to be the stopgaps while the prospects were developing in their respective places, whether it was
the Craig
college,
Smiths, the Patty Maroons,
the Nick Folignos,
Alec Martinez.
Yep. And so that was the reason why the Blackhawks went down those routes in the past. But now that Connor Bedard is a full-time NHL player, I guess he always has been, but now Frank Nazar is a full-time NHL player, and what he showed in the Worlds, that he continued that against NHL players overseas for Team USA, leading them in points. You have Sam Lafferty and Artem Levshunov that showed a ton of promise towards the end of last season. Kyle can start penciling those players into potential roles, but also feel comfortable enough that they will be able to handle those roles and not just, let's just throw them out there and hope that they'll be okay. Like, they showed enough where you're like, okay, Sam Lafferty was logging 20 plus minutes of ice time and barely seemed like he was tired doing so. So you know that he's going to be okay in that role going forward. Same with Artem Levshunov. I thought Levshunov was better in the NHL than he was in the AHL. And I think it's just, sometimes it just works that way, where the NHL style of game where it's just less scrambly for defensemen specifically.
More predictable,
yeah,
the outcomes.
Yes. And so I think Kyle is looking at this like, let's not Kyle wants to add a strong supporting cast at some point, but he doesn't want to do it at the expense of blocking a young player's path from getting those minutes. Like, I think last year the Hawks were super aggressive with Tyler Bertuzzi and 𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗍 𝗟𝗏 and shoring up those supporting type players. But this year it's like, we want to give the keys to the young guys and let them run with it. Now, the challenge is, if they do hit some sort of wall, like Frank Nazar, this will be his first season going through the rigors of an 82-game season. You want to make sure that there are other players, potentially veterans like a 𝗵𝘀𝗶𝗃 and a Sam Lafferty, that can kind of prop them up while they go through that. But I think that's why the Hawks re-signed Ryan Donato as well. Like, they want to be able to have guys that are slotted more into third line roles, but can play up in the lineup if they need to, while they figure out the situation with the younger players. So again, I have no problem. I understand the frustration from fans, because it feels like, they just want to see winning hockey again. But I promise you, it is far better being overly patient than being too impatient, and then you actually wreck the timeline of the rebuild, because now you're trying to undo things that shouldn't have been done in the first place, because the Hawks are just not at a time yet where they're ready to be pushing for the playoffs. So I caution to continue to stay patient, but this is the keys. Kyle is fully giving them to the young players going into next season.
Kyle talked about preliminary conversations with restricted free agents that became eligible to have dialogue starting on July 1st. That's Connor Bedard, that's Frank Nazar, that's Spencer Knight. It sounds like, while there's no rush, it's definitely a priority, and things are progressing.
Yeah, we're seeing this around the NHL too, with, like, starting July 1 today, like Connor McDavid, Jack Eichel, Kirill Kaprizov, all of them are now eligible to sign extensions with their teams. But we're seeing what the salary cap could look like in the coming years. And is there going to be expansion? We're going to an 84-game schedule the following year. So how is that going to boost the salary cap, years from now? All of that is changing, and the salary cap is growing exponentially. So there's really no incentive for players to sign earlier than later. Now, if you're the Blackhawks, I'm sure you want to get that done so you kind of have a better idea of what the financial picture is. But the longer it goes with guys like Bedard and Nazar and Spencer Knight, there should be, even if they went into the season unsigned, there should be zero concern, because they're trying to leverage their own body of work to try to get the best possible deal for them. Connor, Nazar, they're all on record saying they want to be Hawks for life. So there's no incentive for them to want to go anywhere. They're just trying to accumulate as much information as possible and maybe get out to a strong start this coming season to potentially earn a larger contract. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to go into the season, as matter of factly, without a contract, because it could very well happen over the summer. But I wouldn't be alarmed if it doesn't happen.
I want to talk about the goalie situation, because he touched on the organizational depth chart. It's going to be Spencer Knight, it's going to be Soderblom, and then Laurent Brossoit, who was injured all of last year, still under contract. He's going to go to camp, we assume, if he's healthy. 𝗪 𝗻𝗄 had a great finish to his season in the AHL. They expect him to carry the workload in Rockford. So with a thin goalie market out there, what is the do you build Laurent Brossoit up as much as you can and then try to deal him, or what do you think the thought process is?
Yeah, it's a really good question because you want to do it. You don't want to go into next season carrying three goaltenders, and you kind of have to give Laurent Brossoit action just to show to other teams that he's feeling healthy, because then it blocks the Blackhawks from going to a Spencer Knight, Arvid Soderblom situation where they could just go back and forth. Not really a 1A, 1B type situation, but you want to make sure that Arvid is getting his reps too. I think where Chicago is that they're just going to have to get as much medical information on Brossoit as possible. And when he is fully cleared 100% and the Hawks can kind of make him available internally, like behind closed doors, maybe not publicly, they can say, hey, here's the medical information. If you want it, everything is good, because he's dealing with the same situation as 𝗵𝗪 did in Vancouver, and Demko just signed an extension in Vancouver. So clearly there aren't any concerns there. I think with the Brossoit situation, it was such a weird timeline all season long where they were expecting him to be back. He was on the ice, then he hit a hiccup and he had to go back. And then it was like getting another procedure done. Then he was pushing it. And it was always like there were these barometers of, well, he wants to play. He wants to play. He wants to play. Kyle was saying now that they're in the off season, there are no checkpoints that he has to hit. Like they have the luxury to literally just rest him for 2 months, make sure that he can get fully healthy, and then they can revisit things as they get closer to August to kind of have a better idea of what his health status could be.
One thing when I was watching TSN throughout the day, because there was not much free agent frenzy to talk about, they were talking about Team Canada and how the Olympic roster might look. And because of the success Team Canada had in the Four Nations, you'd figure most of that roster would come back in some way, shape, or form. Of course, that didn't include Connor Bedard. It didn't include Macklin Celebrini, both of which, Bob McKenzie had Celebrini making his Olympic roster. And I think maybe it was Craig Button who put it together. But I think that's going to be a real big motivational tool for Connor to get off to a big start this year. Probably he won't talk about it a lot publicly. He keeps his goals to himself, but I'm sure having an opportunity to try to make Team Canada for the Olympics is something that he's definitely thought about.
For sure. And I think because he really wasn't on Team Canada's radar for the Four Nations tournament, it's almost like he has to really play himself into the conversation, because it wasn't like he just missed out on the bubble and all he has to do is just be a little bit better. It's like he really has to have a hot start this coming season to play himself into that conversation, and then make sure that he could be a piece, because Team Canada, they have so many skilled offensive players. So then he has to kind of play himself into the conversation of, is this the guy that would be a better option on our second power play unit than, guys like Braden Point or Brandon Hague or whatever, so like he would really have to light it up offensively to make sure that he's playing himself into that.
So Nikolai Eers is probably the biggest free agent out there that has yet to be signed. It sounds like it's going to take a little time. He's in the driver's seat. Again, it's a thin free agency difference-making class, and he's now at the top of it. And so he's probably sorting through some offers, and he'll make it in the next couple days.
Yeah, he was the one guy that I actually, if there was a name in this free agent class that I wouldn't have minded the Blackhawks to go out and get, it would be Nikolai Eers, and more so because of what it would have cost. If you go out and obviously Mitch Marner, like he's the big fish, right? But it's like $12+ million. That's a huge move. Whereas Nikolai Eers is like would be a sneaky good pickup for any team. The challenge with him, he has, I guess, had made it known that he is willing to take lesser money for the right winning situation. So again, we're out there saying Ehlers, Chicago, just not an option because it takes, like you said, two to tango. The one thing we forgot to mention on the last podcast, not actually forgot, but we were talking about the NHL and 𝗍𝗏𝗶𝗹, the new CBA agreement.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I had forgot to mention was they closed up the loophole where you can trade a player to a third party first, and then like that team retains salary. And then they said, so you know how Chicago played the third party broker in the Mikko Rantanen? So now if a team wants to do that, you have to wait. It's like 70 days to trade that player again. So that's a pretty significant order of business that they closed up. So it's like if the Hawks, if the Hawks wanted, or if a team wanted to trade a player to Chicago and the Hawks retain 50% of the salary, then they trade him again. There's another 50%. Like you have to wait 70 days or however long it is to do that. So that's another thing I wanted to throw out there as we kind of move forward.
Okay. I think we covered a lot of ground here. Anything that we didn't hit that you wanted to touch on?
No, I think we're good. I calmed down a little bit. Thank you for letting me talk through this. Understood.
I mean, again, social media, it's a necessary evil sometimes, and it is what it is.
Yeah. What's funny is it's like you hear a portion of the fan base that it's like they're frustrated that the Hawks didn't do more, and then you ask them, what did you want them to do? They should have signed Mitch Marner. It's like, well, we it's like the complaints never equal what the solution is. Like that you can complain, but if you don't have a solution to it, it's just kind of just wasted energy. And so, I mean, you can literally walk through any player in this free agent class that's at the top, or even go into the trade list of players like, 𝗵𝗏𝗋𝗀 or whatever. Like obviously Chicago like made an effort there, but it's like 𝗵𝗏𝗋𝗀, Buffalo was looking for a right-handed shot defenseman. That's what they wanted. So Chicago just was never in it because they didn't have the right-handed shot defenseman that could grow long-term with Buffalo. So yeah, it's tough. I get it. It's the frustration of wanting to get back to winning hockey. So you understand that it's coming from a good place, but it's also practically to get there. The Hawks could have done far more damage to the long term of this rebuild if they were irresponsible in the way that they tried to add players this free agency versus just staying overly patient and giving the young players the keys to the ship going into next year, and then they can go big game hunting in the coming years.
And look, I get it. They want to see incremental growth, and Burakovsky and Sam Lafferty, don't say that they project that's going to be 10 to 15 more points for this team necessarily. They want to see change. You're going to see change because you're going to see some of these younger players get opportunities, and we'll see if they're ready for those opportunities. Instead of going to the journeymans, the 𝗵𝗶𝗹𝗍 and leaning on somebody like that to help usher in culture and bring along younger players. Now they're going to, by and large, ask some of these younger players if they're ready to make the next step in their NHL journey, and that remains to be seen how that goes.
Right. I think we were spoiled watching Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews step into a situation where the infrastructure was on a silver platter with the Keiths, the Seabrooks, the Sharps, the Bolins. Then you add Marian Hossa the next year. Like it was just a perfect scenario that came to get together perfectly. In this rebuild, the Blackhawks won the Connor Bedard sweepstakes in year one. So it's like, wait, they're not, the infrastructure's not here yet. So they're trying to find a way to bridge the gap quickly, but not irresponsibly. Yeah. And so I understand it could be a difficult balance to try to strike.
And again, I think for a lot of the Blackhawks fans from the Cup era, they feel like the clock started when Kane and Toews were drafted and played relatively quick. When you could look at Duncan Keith spent time in Norfolk for a while. Corey Crawford spent 6 years in the minor leagues before he got his opportunity. The Andrew Ladds, the the Chris Versteegs.
Duncan Keith spent 2 full years in the minors before sniffing the NHL. And that was also playing in college, too, the year prior. So it was a long time.
Patrick Sharp, all these different. And so when you kind of thought the thing started, it had started years before. We just don't remember some of the Trent Yanni rough years that this franchise went through in the 2000s before we got to 08, 09, and 10 when everything hit stride.
Yeah, and you also have to remember the path that the Blackhawks took prior to declaring a full-scale rebuild. The Hawks ended up going out and acquiring Seth Jones, and they acquired Marc-Andre Fleury, and they went out and got Tyler Johnson. It was these stopgap options that were significant in the moment. But even when they did that, they tried to make one last run with it with Kane and Toews, they were still well below the playoffs. So the Hawks needed to go down this route. It's just when they declared the rebuild, they won the Connor Bedard sweepstakes. And then there's a portion of the fan base that thought, all right, rebuild's over. When it's no, it's just getting started. But it's going to take time for the players that got for example, Oliver Moore got drafted with Connor Bedard. Is he going to be a full-time NHL player next year? I don't know. I think he still needs minor league time. But for Bedard, that's going to be year 3 of his full NHL season. But it's the guy that was drafted 18 picks later still hasn't even become an NHL full-time player yet. So it's tough.
It's crazy. And then when you look at teams that are winning cups like Florida, most of their players are 29 to 35. Right. And we've just talked about spent time about a 17 and 18 and 19 and a 20-year-old that's where we're at. We're really in the infancy. And again, nobody wants to keep hearing that. But when you compare it to what is actually going on, you get some perspective.
Right.
And when you see Brad Marchand get did he get a 6-year contract?
Yeah.
37 years old, and he got a 6-year contract.
Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah. So essentially, that was Florida's way of saying, we know that you're going to get 3 times 8.5 or 4 times 8.5 on the open market. We'll give you that $32+ million that you're going to get, but we'll stretch it out over 6 years, fully realizing that he'll probably be on LTIR by year 5 at least, or at most,
for sure.
So, but yes, the Hawks are trying to build a run, a long run. They're not trying to say, hey, we just want to win a Stanley Cup and just, hey, that's it. That's great. They want to be perennial contenders for a long time, and this is the way to do it. It's not to try to fast track it irresponsibly just to give yourself the best chance at winning a Stanley Cup sooner. They're trying to say, hey, even if this might take a year or 2 later than we want, we would rather do it this way, knowing that it could result in 10+ years of every year the Hawks are going into it with Stanley Cup aspirations. That is the goal for Chicago.
All right. This rebuild is taking as long as this podcast right now. I'm going to wrap this bad boy up. That is going to do it for this edition of the Blackhawks Breakaway Podcast for CHSN. For Charlie Roumeliotis, I'm Pat Boyle. Thank you for watching and listening, and we will catch you next time.